Good morning, everyone. Tashtele. I'm going to start the prayer with the praise to the Lord Buddha. Okay? Tabge toji shaje rezu chung shinge medu duge punjomba serge lumbo tabu jebego shaje jebe kela chancel kange tambo changju togene sonami shi tonen zozeji tuden zeba jajin rowai gunju kela dage tobreke hanam denzen duen dugene lalepane lanchin tashishin relasine lamon jujeme Lomsu shubura zela chancelo dawa chuzu shaje sebune tashelombe sedu tambetse changda jejengedu zenjone Chanju rezu ngeze chancelo shunu topde me sengede anga manga dane juzede kewo chakbe chenam sajene denda mebran zela chancelo jiden chodan tumbra chawatan kanamato panchi tumoyi kordan denze tabla kebaye jesi chongwan zela chancelo korwe chawa nimbo mesine kimni chongde kala sheneja Shede namda chongdo nyelene rabdo chongwan zela chancelo zunbe chanchun rubar konene Naranzane Jamdo Lojodo, Kawachiz, Zunju Tachenbe, Samde Chonin Zela, Chancelo, Toma Menen, Beba Doinch, Manganda Chanju Shinjodo, Gedrome, Ambra Sanjene, Chanjun Zopranzela, Chancelo, Tujinjola, Nudu Sinin, Wara Nazila Sunejodo, Chugi Kolokonen, Janam, Teba Sunago, Chancelo, Shingingoa, and Batsajishi. Modi tempa tudan lejenso komonjigi yudu dunamde tuba yulejela chanzelo sebasuna peme yundenge nyendu yuba churu chembote lamin rowa kunge rabjeba tembra jebra zela chanzelo lelo chenam chola kujiche zaju donge sashi zamar chimin doji tabu kujine nyangen dauran zela chanzelo yanda nindu jiba mejeda mawa semjen sunam tojiche teni tune renze mandrun Kudon chajen zela chancelo kela dujin sowa tabetu daso kandu nebe sajusu nedan upon tabzi shewat chuedan draji pewaran zedu so kanri rawe korwe shinkansu pendan dewa malu chongwene jenre sewa tenzen janzui shabe side bardo tenjuji kewa kondo yanda lama tan jamin chuge pala longjujin sadan lamke yende ramzon dorji change gofan yortop show.
Thank you so much for blessing us with this. Yes, so may I invite the speakers for the first panel. You all know who you are, and I'll introduce you when you're ready to take a seat, please. And in the meantime, please join us. Representative Serinyanki, Father Lawrence, Dr. Reza, Dr. Desmond Biddulph, and Lady Mohini Kentnoon. Please join me here. And in the meantime, I know it sounds odd, but right after prayer, I'm reminding you of a couple of important things, which is there are no fire alarms planned. So if there's a fire alarm, we need to go out. Health and safety matters, right? I'm connecting to that. That's important to bear in mind because I realized I should have reminded all of you in the beginning. If there's a fire alarm, please follow our volunteers who will take you out, but there's nothing planned. But whenever I have done events on Tibet in the past, I don't know whether it was the case in 2009 or not, occasionally, I've had fire alarm go off out of blue. I don't want to read conspiracy into it, given that the Chinese embassy is not very far, right? But that's okay. But there's no plan. So if it happens, we'll go out and we'll come back, right? That's just want to remind you of that. On that note, in fact, okay. I think I can stand and manage. It's okay, right? So that's okay. Each one of you. So again, thank you. So we start with the first panel, which is on celebrating the legacy of the 14th Dalai Lama for compassion and interfaith religious harmony. The first speaker is representative in the Office of Tibet, London, Serinyanki, who's going to speak on 4 principal commitments of the Dalai Lama.
Tashdile, and good morning, everyone. At the very outside, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to the organizers of this important conference, former Representative Sonam Frasila and Professor Dibesh Anand, the Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University of Westminster, for inviting me to speak at this special gathering. As we are all aware that this conference is being held to celebrate the life and legacy of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet in honor of his 90th birthday, a milestone which the Central Tibetan Administration in Dharamsala has dedicated as the Year of Compassion. This occasion holds a deep personal and professional significance for me, both as a representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and of the Central Tibetan Administration. However, I must humbly admit that I am by no means an expert on this topic I'll be speaking about, so I may not be able to fully capture or convey the vastness and depth of His Holiness's vision. So I would ask for your understanding in advance in case I fall short in doing justice to it. The topic I'll be speaking about is the four principal commitments of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And what I hope to offer today is a simple overview or an introduction to these commitments, which serves as the guiding principles of His Holiness's work and life. So the first principal commitment of His Holiness is promotion of human values. As human beings, we share some essential and fundamental values regardless of our nationality or cultural background. Values such as love, compassion, peace, forgiveness, generosity, and tolerance are universally practiced and appreciated as a part of secular ethics. His Holiness the Dalai Lama advocates for the promotion of these values, these basic human values, for the sake of global peace and harmony. How does His Holiness the Dalai Lama promote shared human values through a secular approach to ethics? His Holiness draws on three main sources. The first is the shared human experience. His Holiness urges each of us to reflect deeply on our human common experience. We all experience kindness, we all experience and appreciate kindness and feel hurt when we are treated badly. Fundamentally, we all desire happiness and wish to avoid sufferings. Secondly, common sense. As human beings, we are endowed with the ability and reason to reason and discern what is beneficial and what is harmful to ourselves and to others. Thirdly, scientific reasons. Scientific evidence. Modern scientific research increasingly shows that compassion and kindness contribute a greater well-being and better health, especially heart health, blood pressure, and immune system. So by combining insights from science, from common sense, and lived human experience, His Holiness the Dalai Lama promotes an ethical framework grounded in the understanding that values, empathy, and compassion are core to our human nature. These are not religious values, but universal human values arising from our inherently human nature. His Holiness Dalai Lama emphasizes that the concept of the oneness of the humanity is more crucial than ever in today's interconnected and globalized world. Many of the challenges we now face, such as the climate crisis and the growing economic inequalities, can only be effectively addressed through collective action rooted in the sense of shared humanity. The second principal commitment is promotion of interfaith harmony. This commitment reflects His Holiness Dalai Lama's role as a prominent global religious leader. While all major religions were founded to elevate the human sufferings, guiding people toward a meaningful life, it is also true that religious differences have sometimes contributed to tensions and conflict locally, globally, and nationally. In light of this, His Holiness has been a strong and consistent advocate for religious harmony. How does His Holiness promote religious harmony? By fostering mutual respect among religions, His Holiness believes that genuine religious harmony must be rooted in mutual respect and understanding. His Holiness encourages individuals of all faiths to reflect on three key principles. The first is that the core teaching of all major religions share fundamental values such as love, compassion, kindness, tolerance, and forgiveness. Secondly, all religions serve the spiritual needs of millions and offer meaningful guidance, just as different medicines are used to treat different illnesses. Various religions address the diverse spiritual needs of humanity. Thirdly, philosophical differences among religions should not be viewed as divisions, but rather as a source of richness that enhance the collective wisdom of world's spiritual traditions. Secondly, promoting interfaith harmony, understanding. His Holiness emphasizes the importance of learning about the beliefs and practices of other religions. He maintains that such knowledge is essential for cultivating genuine understanding, mutual respect, and peaceful coexistence among diverse faith communities. Thirdly, supporting interreligious dialogues, meetings, and exchange programs. For decades, His Holiness has actively participated and supported interfaith dialogue, international religious conferences, and exchange programs. He views these initiatives as vital platforms for building trust, fostering cooperation, and nurturing mutual understanding among different religious groups. His message is clear. Harmony among religions is not only possible, it is essential for the future well-being of humanity. Thirdly, the preservation of Tibetan language, culture, and environment. As the spiritual leader of the Tibetan people, His Holiness is committed to preserving Tibetan language and culture, which are deeply rooted in Buddhism. Tibetan language is is a classical language still in use, preserving ancient Buddhist teachings, offering insights into ethics, meditation, and consciousness. Tibetan Buddhist texts of Kangyur and Tengyur are studied by scholars worldwide. Tibetan Buddhist philosophy and 10 major and minor Tibetan cultural studies are all written in Tibetan language. We therefore say that Tibetan language is the root and the essence of Tibetan identity. Besides, it's also a rich repository of ancient knowledge. Tibetan culture is deeply rooted in Tibetan Buddhism. It is a unique repository of spiritual wisdom, artistic heritage, and philosophical thought. As a spiritual wisdom, it offers deep insights into mindfulness, compassion, and non-violence, values that resonates universally in today's interconnected and turbulent world. His Holiness the Dalai Lama advocates for the protection and conservation of Tibet's environment, recognizing its crucial importance in global and regional platforms. Known as the roof of the world, Tibet has an average elevation of 4,500 meters and plays a vital role in shaping atmospheric circulation patterns. Tibet is also referred to as Earth's third pole, Asia's water tower, due to its vast reserves of glaciers, second only to the polar regions. These glaciers feed several of Asia's major rivers, serving as a crucial water source for over 1 billion people across the continent. Beyond environmental significance, Tibet is also rich in natural resources, including major reserves of copper, lithium, and gold. This fourth commitment of His Holiness arises from the deep historical and spiritual connection between Tibetan Buddhism and ancient India. Tibetan Buddhism is deeply rooted in the Nalanda tradition of Indian philosophy and thought. While Buddhism originated in India, it found a lasting and flourishing home in Tibet. His Holiness the Dalai Lama often remarks that we Tibetans are sincere and devoted chelas of the Indian Guru. So as a gesture of Guru Dakshina, a token of respect and gratitude to your spiritual teacher, His Holiness is deeply committed to helping India revive its ancient wisdom. His Holiness emphasizes that India's ancient understanding of mind, emotions, and methods of mental training such as meditation, is highly relevant in today's world, especially in addressing modern issues like stress, anxiety, and emotional imbalance. His Holiness envisions a future where India harmoniously blends its rich heritage of inner knowledge with modern science and technology, creating a model that could contribute significantly to global peace and well-being. To advance this vision, His Holiness initiated the Mind and Life Dialogue, a platform to encourage interdisciplinary discussions and foster holistic understanding and promote compassion and ethics in science and promote mental health and well-being. Just a week ago, the Mind and Life Dialogue hosted a conference on mind, artificial intelligence and ethics in Dharamsala, the abode of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I believe that the importance of ethics in AI is paramount, as it affects nearly every aspect of our life. His Holiness has also initiated the establishment of a center in Bodh Gaya, India, known as the Dalai Lama Center for Tibetan and Indian Ancient Wisdom. This center aims to serve as a bridge between the ancient insights and contemporary challenges, fostering a revival of timeless values for the benefit of humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Representative Sarin Jankila, and for keeping to 11 minutes 55 seconds. So that's perfect. Thank you so much. Set example. Set examples, 11 minutes 55 seconds. Our next speaker is Father Lawrence Freeman, OSB, from the World Community of Christian Meditation, who's going to speak on the common ground of religion and dialogue as the basis of harmony between religions. Over to you, Father.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will try to compete with your punctuality, but if nothing else. Thank you. I first met, first of all, I have to say what an honor it is to be here and to be able to contribute to the celebration of the life and the legacy of His Holiness and these 90 years which have really touched the world in extraordinary ways. I first met His Holiness when I was a young monk in Montreal in 1979, assisting my teacher, John Main, Father John Main, in establishing a community there. Father John was asked by the Archbishop to arrange an interfaith gathering at the cathedral to welcome His Holiness. Father John accepted the invitation, but insisted on the inclusion of a session of meditation in silence to bring all participants to touch the oneness of their common ground. And His Holiness remarked later this was the first time he had meditated in a Christian environment. Afterwards, His Holiness met Father John, who invited him to join our new small community for our midday meditation and prayer, for lunch and discussion afterwards. This was the beginning of a long and fruitful friendship, which led, after Father John's death, to a number of significant milestones, I think, in interspiritual dialogue, including the Good Heart Seminar, the Way of Peace series, culminating in Bodh Gaya with a 3-day seminar. We meditated every morning under the Bodhi tree, and many individual events like the visit to Belfast in the year 2000 and dialogues. These and my own subsequent relationship with His Holiness have taught me much and convinced me that religion itself must be transformed. As so much else is being changed in our world today, our global theme in our community, we take a theme every year, our global theme for 2026 is the future of religion. What on earth is religion for? Over this year, we will have 10 events led by original rooted thinkers or teachers on this theme. This has been in many ways inspired by what I have learnt from His Holiness. His Holiness is a deeply religious individual, rooted in a profoundly religious tradition, as we've heard. Yet he uses this depth and rootedness to open a dialogue, a sustainable dialogue, with science and secularism and social rights, as well as between religions, new and old. Religions deal with absolutes. This means there is a danger. There's a danger of superficial agreement between people of different opinions, but just a superficial handshaking kind of agreement that covers deeper divisions and even competitiveness and hostility. His Holiness has avoided these dangers by the force of his own integrity, by his consistent prioritizing of compassion as the linchpin of all universal human values, especially important in a world which is losing the meaning of virtue every day. The happiness and peace that we pretend to pursue need to be consolidated in human nature itself, at its deepest, grounded not in mere curiosity or platitudes, but interior calm and altruism. This is where human nature reveals itself in its true colors, in its true identity. And this is the common ground of the goodness of human nature, recognized in different ways by all the great religious traditions and taught by their unique wisdom paths. Whether in Buddha nature or the human being seen as the image of God, religions can heal the wounds of all divisions and reverse the tide of violence that is created by those divisions. In other words, we go back to our root, to our source, to our common ground, and out of that will come the creativity and the vision and the energy to heal and build. His Holiness has shown that this is achievable, that a new kind of religion is necessary to do it on the scale needed today. I believe His Holiness will always be recognized in history as a major contributor to building that spiritual subculture that is needed to confront and defeat the domination of intolerance and violence that we are witnessing every day. A transformed religious consciousness can achieve this. His Holiness sees that religion cannot be allowed to be weaponized or politicized. It must be grounded in the humility of authentic contemplative practice, with the fruits that come from that, of wisdom and kindness and depth of enlightenment. Real dialogue is a compound of pure, other-centered listening and truthful speaking. It is the experience of transformation brought about not by force or guile, but by pure attention. When religious people can share this gift of reciprocal listening, the power of attention is generated. And that leads to a transformation of consciousness. Consciousness is always bilateral. Truthful speaking will then follow. This can be experienced intermittently from time to time at a good meeting or at a good encounter, but the common goal must be to make it the normal environment of religion. The most direct way to this goal is shared contemplative practice. To meditate together before a session of dialogue or a conversation has very powerful effects. A UN negotiator in our community once told me that for 18 years he has led climate change negotiations, and in those 18 years he has never seen anybody change their mind. It's quite a thought. So, His Holiness, I once asked His Holiness if he felt he had gained anything from the bitter pain of his long exile. And he immediately replied, yes. I have met people, faiths, teachers, cultures from across humanity. It has been a great pain, but also a great gift. His Holiness was certainly consciously transformed by that exposure to the world. Despite criticism and opposition, he never lost the courage to engage in dialogue with all of them. We are blessed by his life, his legacy, and his living example. Thank you.
Thank you so much for very powerful speech. Thank you. Our third speaker, you're sitting there. And our third speaker is Dr. Reza Shah Kazemi from the Institute of Ismaili Studies, who's going to speak on the Dalai Lama and the dynamics of dialogue. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to start by thanking Dibyesh and all of you for all of the wonderful efforts and kind organization that you've put into this. I also would like to emphasize that I'm speaking in a private capacity this morning, and largely as the author of this book, Common Ground Between Islam and Buddhism, which the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, very kindly wrote a preface to. So I'm going to just read something from this book, a little section entitled The Dalai Lama and the Dynamics of Dialogue. This paper in a sense is a continuation of Father Lawrence's, because I want to start with the Gethsemane encounter, which the Dalai Lama at which the Dalai Lama gave a very important paper entitled Harmony, Dialogue and Meditation. And this Gethsemane encounter is between Christian contemplatives, Benedictines, and Buddhist monks. It took place in July 1996 at Gethsemane, Kentucky. And the Dalai Lama began by saying that he wanted to avoid any idea of a kind of competitive one-upmanship in these dialogues and this encounter. He said that there's only one kind of constructive competition that should be engaged in, and this is how he put it. The Buddhists should implement what we believe in daily life, and our Christian brothers and sisters should also implement their teachings in daily life. Implementation of belief is central to the Dalai Lama's vision of the transformative power of practice. It is insofar as, quote, each side would like to be better practitioners that the competition between them is constructive and not destructive. For the Dalai Lama, the very process by which one deepens the practice of one's own tradition illuminates the truth and the wisdom of other traditions. For the spiritual experience consequent upon deeper practice enables one, again I quote from the Dalai Lama's paper, to see the value of other traditions. He says, to promote religious harmony, one should look into one's own tradition seriously and implement it as much as possible. End of quote. If, by contrast, one restricts oneself to the purely theoretical aspects of one's tradition, then the values which bring human beings together in goodness will be eclipsed by dogmatic coagulations. To quote again from the paper, all religions teach a message of love, compassion, sincerity, and honesty. Each system seeks in its own way to improve life for us all. But if we put too much emphasis on our own philosophy, religion, or theory, becoming too attached to it, and try to impose it on other people, the result will be trouble. Basically, all the great teachers, including Gautama Buddha, Jesus Christ, Muhammad, and Moses, were motivated by a desire to help their fellow beings. End of quote. The Dalai Lama's message on dialogue, on the spiritual dynamics underlying true dialogue, is at once ethically simple and spiritually profound, eminently practicable and philosophically irrefutable. If you bring to life within yourself the fundamental values of your own religion, you will not only change yourself, but you will change the whole world, according to the Dalai Lama. Through your kindness towards others, your mind and heart will open to peace. Expanding this inner environment to the larger community around you will bring unity, harmony, and cooperation. Expanding peace further still to nations and then to the world will bring mutual trust, mutual respect, sincere communication, and fully successful joint efforts to solve the world's problems. All this is possible, but first we must change ourselves. Each one of us is responsible for mankind. End of the quote. One is reminded here of the verse of the Quran, truly God will not change the condition of a people until they change the condition of their own souls. In chapter 13, verse 11. The following passage expresses a compelling picture of the power of the dialogical dynamics that are unleashed by the sincere and ever-deepening practice of one's own faith. Those who realize the deepest values of their own faith are referred to by the Dalai Lama again and again as, quote, practitioners. Those who engage in the meditative dimensions of their faith alongside the philosophical dimensions. And these are the ones who would constitute the most effective partners in authentic dialogue. I quote, "It is my belief that if prayer, meditation, and contemplation are combined in daily practice, the effect on the practitioner's mind and heart will be all the greater. One of the major aims and purposes of religious practice for the individual is an inner transformation from an undisciplined, untamed, unfocused state of mind toward one that is disciplined, tamed, and balanced. A person who has perfected the faculty of single-pointedness will definitely have a greater ability to attain this objective. When meditation becomes an important part of your spiritual life, you are able to bring about this inner transformation in a more effective way. Once this transformation has been achieved, then, in following your own spiritual tradition, you will discover that a kind of natural humility will arise in you, allowing you to communicate better with people from other religious traditions and cultural backgrounds. You are in a better position to appreciate the values and preciousness of other traditions because you have seen this value from within your own tradition. Finally, I just wanted to quote one thing to help, again, following on from what Father Lawrence said about the danger of exclusivism and the fanaticism and violence that can stem therefrom. A final point about how the Dalai Lama helps us to overcome the psychology of religious fundamentalism. Implicit in what he says in this last paragraph I'm going to quote from is that this kind of fundamentalism arises out of an inability to understand other religions, but also an inability to plumb the depth of one's own tradition. Quote, people often experience feelings of exclusivity in their religious beliefs, a feeling that one's own path is the only true path, which can create a sense of apprehension about connecting with others of different faiths. I believe the best way to counter this force is to experience the value of one's own path through a meditative life, which will enable one to see the value and preciousness of other traditions. So I'd like to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reza. Our next speaker is Dr. Desmond Biddle, CB, who's president of the Buddhist Society of United Kingdom, who's going to speak on role of the Dalai Lama in promoting interfaith and religious harmony. Over to you. Do you have any slides? No. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here and to be able to contribute to this meeting today. And just to say a little bit about myself, I started life as a Roman Catholic, and we spent many hours in church. I have a great debt to Christianity because of the kind of religious training that I had when I was a young man. But during the many hours in church, I used to read all sorts of books. And one of the books I came across was a book on Eastern religion, and it sort of got me going in that direction. And then, as a young man practicing medicine and so on, of course, you're confronted with death all the time, and illness and sickness and suffering in all its various forms. And so I got drawn towards the Buddha Dharma. And that's how I got in contact with the Buddhist Society. And I met the founder, Christmas Humphreys, and various other wonderful people there. And I became a Buddhist, just found myself doing it. Partly because I got involved in mental health, and I trained as a Jungian analyst, and that also gave me a great deal of insight, and I ended up where I am now as a president of the society, with a sort of representational role, not as a holy person or anything of that kind. But anyway, just to say something about His Holiness, he became our patron, so he's very close to us in so many ways, and although we initially invited him to become a patron because we thought it would help him in his cause, but actually over time we found that actually the benefits have all been for us and not really for him. We are a very small society, and but the Dalai Lama, we owe enormous gratitude to him. But for more than 6 decades, he has embodied what one might call the spirit of universal responsibility, a vision that transcends all divisions of race, creed, and nationality. And as His Holiness himself said, the purpose of religion is to create good people. When His Holiness left Tibet in 1959, crossing the Himalayas into India, he did not do so as a conqueror or a politician, but as a monk carrying within him the spirit of a civilization rooted in peace. He would later say, "My religion is very simple. My religion is kindness." That single sentence has entered the moral vocabulary of our age. In 1961, His Holiness accepted the invitation to become patron of the Buddhist Society in London and was the first Buddhist organization in the Western world to receive that honor. It was started by my cousin, Francis Beaufort Palmer, and some other enlightened beings at the time. And in 1973 and 76, he came to England at the invitation of the Buddhist Society, and he awakened a generation of young people to the universal values of Buddhism. And this can't really be underestimated. It wasn't just that he introduced Buddhism, he introduced a new view, a new concept of what religion was really about. And I think that you can't underestimate the value of that. And it's seeped into all sorts of things in society, into science, medicine, philosophy, particularly into mental health. But it's had a very profound and deep effect, and his repeated visits have deepened that. He then, during that particular time, he talked about basic Buddhist values of compassion, patience, discipline, and so on. And at the Royal Albert Hall, in front of a very vast crowd of people, he reminded us all that religion seeks to cultivate a good heart. In 1989, His Holiness received the Nobel Prize, not only for his non-violent leadership of the Tibetan people, but for his teaching that genuine peace must be built upon compassion, and that there is no real peace unless it's built on compassion. It can't just be built on treaties. Treaties were not enough. And as during the time, actually, the Tiananmen Square period, when he could have actually said a lot of things about the Chinese people, but he didn't do that, and he's never criticized the Chinese people, nor the suffering that he's undergone, except in a very mild kind of way. He told a gathering in Washington, "We must build a century of dialogue, a century of peace. We've tried war, we've tried weapons, now we must try the human heart." In the United States, His Holiness has become one of the most trusted moral voices of the modern era. He's met every US president since George Bush, and in 2007 received the Congressional Gold Medal. His interfaith dialogues with Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, and Native American leaders emphasize what he calls the oneness of humanity. At a meeting with evangelical Christians, he said, "When I see someone pray with deep faith, even in that faith is not my own, my heart is moved." Beyond America, His Holiness has become a symbol of interreligious friendship. In India, his adopted home, he joins Hindus, Muslims, Jains, and Sikh leaders in the Sarvadharma Sammelan, the meeting of all faiths. In Europe, he has shared platforms with the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Chief Rabbi, the Patriarch of Constantinople. At the World Parliament of Religions, he said different religions are like different medicines for the same illness, and the illness of ignorance, anger, and greed. In 2012, His Holiness received the Templeton Prize at St. Paul's Cathedral in London, speaking beneath the great dome that has witnessed so many centuries of Christian prayer. He spoke of compassion as a universal energy, a force stronger than any weapon. And he has developed the idea of secular ethics, teaching that goodness and compassion do not depend on religion's belief, but on the shared wish of all beings to avoid suffering. His encouragement of interfaith service projects, Buddhist monks working with Christian charities or Tibetan nuns supporting Muslim education initiatives, demonstrates that harmony is not a theory, but a practice. At the 2015 Interfaith gathering at the House of Lords, organized by the Buddhist Society to mark his 80th birthday, he said, "Harmony among religions is not a luxury, it's a necessity for peace in our time. And at that meeting, his good humor and his vibrant presence, he overcame all sorts of differences. It was a very moving meeting, and at that time there was a young man from Saudi Arabia, and he brought up a really tragic case of someone in Saudi Arabia who was about to be crucified, I remember, because of his belief in Shia Buddhism and not Shia Muslim faith rather than in the Sunni, which is the accepted one in Saudi Arabia. And it was amazing to see how the whole room came together, people of all faiths, in his presence, and were able to see the ridiculousness of that. It was a very moving moment. He often jokes that he's just a simple Buddhist monk, yet his moral authority has shaped the conscience of the modern world in a century often defined by division. He's shown that faith, when guided by wisdom, becomes a wall, not a wall, but a bridge. As patron of the Buddhist Society, as a Nobel laureate, as a Templeton laureate, and as a tireless advocate for peace, His Holiness continues to remind us that the foundation of all true religion is kindness. In our time of turbulence and uncertainty, his message stands as both a challenge and a hope, that compassion can be cultivated, that harmony can be learned, and that, as he says, as long as space endures and as long as beings remain, may I too abide to dispel the suffering of the world. I should also say that the Dalai Lama, his teachings come from the Buddha Dharma, and what makes him able to talk about interfaith in a very sensible kind of way is that Buddhism is based, in fact, on laws of nature, impermanence, the non-existence of any permanent I, and the universality of suffering. This enables him to talk about the human condition in a way which perhaps other religions find great difficulty in doing. But as he always says, religion is there to serve man. We are not here to serve an ideology of any kind. And in order to practice religion, we end up serving man ourselves. And the great discovery, of course, of the Shakyamuni Buddha was a discovery of mind. And I think that's incredibly important in my field. It has transformed psychiatry and continues to do so. I was recently at a meeting of the Royal College of Psychiatry on the special interest group in spirituality and psychopathology. Most interesting meeting. And the application of religious truths in one form or another to people who suffer terribly from mental disease is beginning to transform psychiatry in a very radical kind of way. It's just beginning. A friend of ours who spoke at the Buddhist Society on Schopenhauer, he was talking about actually the Buddhist Enlightenment, European Enlightenment, not the one that we think of as in the 17th century, but the Buddhist Enlightenment, which started with people like Schopenhauer and people who were interested in the Dharma. And I said to him, sort of rather jokingly, well, it hasn't made a great deal of progress. And he said, this was some years ago, he said, it's only just begun. And it's true. These truths which the Dharma bring to us and the discovery of the mind within ourselves are totally and completely transformative. And we do have a chance, if we can give ourselves the time, if we love ourselves enough to look inside and not go chasing after things, we'll find a huge resource of strength and courage. And also what we become is autonomous. We become autonomous, functioning human beings who love and care for each other and for ourselves, and who cannot and will not tolerate inhumanity. And this is a great discovery which we have not yet really incorporated in our education and our thinking. But we have a chance, and the Dalai Lama, I have to say, is somebody who really expresses that in everything he does, particularly in his care for the Tibetan diaspora. We think very much about his preaching life and his sort of popularity, his celebrity even. But actually, during all that time, he's cared very deeply for his own community throughout the Western world and in Tibet too. And in a way, this whole thing we're talking about now is about, at least part of it is about the reincarnation problem. And there is a thing called the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Freedom of Religion and Belief, and we joined that partly through the Dalai Lama, His Holiness's inspiration, but that has very far-reaching effect. Maybe not be very powerful now, and the plight of the Tibetan people may not seem particularly bright, but you have to look at Southern Ireland, what happened there. For many centuries, the 13 minutes, 27 seconds. I got a little bit of time. What happened? Well, he thought it was going to be the end for the Catholics, but now Ireland is one of the richest countries in Europe. And I think we must persevere. It's not just Tibet that we care about. We really care about people. That's what really matters. And it's through Buddhism actually that we can, in our own little way, whether locally or more publicly in places like this, we can hold up the banner, what truth it is, what it is to be a human being, and not tolerate the injustices that we see. This is not political. This is something human that we need to do and need to learn to do more and more. And I think that's now 14 minutes, 24 seconds.
Thank you so much. But that works also with Father Lawrence was shorter than his period, so we could manage it. Thank you so much for this. And our fifth speaker, and we'll have a question answer, of course, that is Lady Mohini Kentnoon, who's Global Envoy in the UK of the International Buddhist Confederation. And she's going to speak about His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Ocean of Compassion and Wisdom.
Thank you very much, Professor Dibyesh Anand and Mr. Sonam Fraisi, for inviting me to celebrate the 9 decades of life and universal service of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And today I would like to talk about what the Dalai Lama means to me personally. One of his books is Beyond Religion, and he's not restrictive. I'm born into a Sikh family, very much a Sikh family, but I've been studying Buddhism since my teenage years. I've worked with a Hindu yogi, and I've written a book with him and created his group in London. I've also spent my childhood in convent schools in India, which were very overtly Catholic in those days. There was no nod to the greater India outside and, the other religions. And I've also, since last 30 years, one of the advantages of having a home in Delhi is also that one met the Dalai Lama there and heard him on many occasions at various institutions. And in 2011, I was invited to become Global Envoy in the UK of the International Buddhist Confederation. Subsequently, I wrote a book on Nagarjuna, for which His Holiness gave me the foreword. So there were many connections. And he has been a great teacher to me. Apart from his wisdom teachings of enlightenment, ethics, nature of the mind, finding inner peace, Nagarjuna, and many others, the simple yet most profound lesson I've learned from him is how to practice spirituality in daily life. Right here and now, in the vexed and tumultuous world that we live in. And much of this I've learned from observing his personal conduct. To be joyful and to be able to laugh despite terrible tragedies. How to be compassionate even towards one's mortal enemies. How to remain humble despite the glories that the world has heaped upon him. And interdependence, one of the cardinal virtues of the Bodha Dharma. Joyfulness is the answer to all disease, the Dalai Lama said. Before the pandemic, he would give teachings in Delhi, 2-day teachings and 1 day of healing every March, and I used to go from London to attend. His laughter would precede him into the room, even if he could have received devastating news from Tibet that morning. And his effervescent humor is contagious. In 2015, when he was here on an extended tour for his 80th birthday, I had the honor to host a lunch for his birthday. And speaking to a group of hand-picked guests, the Dalai Lama recounted how he had tried to bunk studies as a little boy. And what could his tutors do? Because you can't really smack the Dalai Lama, even if he's only 7 years old. So they found a way by creating whip of yellow silk, and he said, it was a holy whip, but I felt holy pain. So when I despair, I remember the Dalai Lama and I smile. If he can laugh, despite the great losses, the anguish of his followers, the destruction of his country, then I can at least try to remain cheerful in the face of much smaller challenges. He is the prophet of peace and non-violence. I'll never forget the story he narrated at one of the teachings in March in Delhi of one of his followers who had come to meet him in India after many years of being incarcerated in a Chinese prison. "Were you afraid?" His Holiness asked. "Yes," came the reply. "I was afraid that I would hate the Chinese." It is almost impossible for us to fathom that level of commitment to non-violence, even in thought. If he did not hate his Chinese oppressors after years in prison, then my anger and hatred towards those who have been cruel, treacherous, and exploitative of me must stop immediately. The Dalai Lama insists that the conquest of inner demons of violence and anger is the true liberation. No matter how much suffering others inflict on us, we must not add to it by tormenting ourselves with the rage and revenge which will destroy our own health and well-being. The Dalai Lama is the incarnation of the Bodhisattva of compassion. That has been a great source of inspiration to me in creating my charity against human trafficking, called Lily Against Human Trafficking. His Holiness said, if you want to be happy, be compassionate. If you want to make others happy, be compassionate. That sounds simple, but it's actually very hard to practice. And the true test in my personal life was to find sustained compassion for my father, who was handicapped for 36 years and lost his eyesight, my mother who suffered terribly, and my husband who was consumed by cancer. And it was all happening at the same time. The Dalai Lama describes himself as a simple Buddhist monk, but he demonstrates what is known as in ancient Indian thought is the power of the act of truth. He has received not only the Nobel Prize for Peace, but at least 90 other awards, including the Templeton Peace Prize. Yet he remains untouched by any of that. He sets a mighty example to us, surrounded as we are by the vanities and posturing of those of much lesser merit. Through more than 6 difficult decades, he has spoken up for harmony and cooperation. Despite the conquest of Tibet, the brutal colonization of his people that followed, the Dalai Lama has stood for non-violence and cooperation. In his speech to the European Parliament in 2001, he said, "It is evident that the human community has reached a critical juncture in its history. Today's world requires us to accept the oneness of humanity. The world is becoming increasingly interdependent. Without the promotion of a sense of universal responsibility, our very future is in danger. That sense of interdependence, of belonging, includes not just the human world, but the world beyond the human world, which has been ravaged and unbalanced by human beings. And as the Buddha said, when you walk, even the trees are your Sangha. The Dalai Lama is a mind scientist, an ocean of wisdom and compassion, and he walks on the path of Shakyamuni Buddha, who showed us that he was not some primal divinity, but all too human. By his spiritual practices and personal effort, became the perfect Buddha. If he can do it, each one of us too can find that freedom, love, and happiness we seek. That to me is the true meaning of the Dalai Lama's presence in our world. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Lady Noon. We have got plenty of time for questions, discussions, and we have a microphone there. The way we will take it, we'll take 2 or 3 questions together. Your question might be addressed to one person or more than one person, that's fine. And then I'll ask the panelists, anyone who wants to respond to them. Is that okay? So who'd like to start with asking question or comment? So we have got one. Anyone else? Okay, let's start with you, please. And feel free to introduce yourself, if comfortable. So.
I'll quickly stand up. Thank you. By the way, thank you for all of those talks. They were really thought-provoking. So I feel bad in the sense of putting a question to just one person. Father Freeman, you spoke about the need for religion to be transformed if it is going to fulfill its obligations in the present day. Could you say a few more words about that?
Thank you.
I could say quite a few more words, yes. Well, thank you for the question. Religion has been with us always. In the last century, there were several attempts to destroy it, from society, in Russia and China and other places, and it doesn't work. You can't get rid of religion in the same way you can't get rid of music or art or many other things. Apple pie. So, the history of religion shows that it's always been intertwined with the social, economic power structures. Religion, hierarchically speaking, began when we began to store food and move into a market economy. So I think that is changing. The one force that has probably done more damage to religion in the ordinary sense, it has succeeded pretty well. It's materialism and consumerism. And that has achieved its effects by making religion seem quaint or irrelevant or corrupt and so on. And the media plays into that a great deal. Nevertheless, so what is the transformation of religion? I think we go back to basics and we would see that there are 3 essential elements in religion. There's the institutional, which will often be involved in the power structures of the society. Then there's the intellectual, which can produce great works of philosophy and so on. But the third element is the mystical. Now, the mystical element of religion tends to have been marginalized or even persecuted by the institutional and the intellectual dimensions of it in all religions, actually. So the safest way to deal with it is, because you can't get rid of it, is to marginalize it. Anyway, that is we're coming to the end of that era, and we're entering into an interesting world where religion, as institutional or intellectual in those ways, is giving way, and the mystical has re-entered society through interreligious dialogue, through cultural exchange and so on, but also now, particularly in the Western world, through well-being and dealing with the consequences of our affluence or of our mismanagement, the stress and anxiety and loneliness and psychological and mental illness. So the transformation of religion, I think, requires that we bring back that connection between the institutional and the intellectual and the mystical, and we give priority to the mystical, in fact, because it is that which holds the intellectual and the institutional in balance. So interreligious dialogue is vital for that, because all religions in different ways face that trouble. His Holiness often spoke to me about, the institutionalism of Tibetan Buddhism. So I think that how we do that is difficult to predict. What one can say is that there is a movement, and that movement of recovering the spiritual dimension has become more intense because more people are being aware that the serious crises we face, particularly, say, with the environment, arise from the fact that we have, on such a huge scale, become disconnected from our own spiritual nature, our own true nature. And there is a confused, often, attempt to recover that. I mean, if you just take the environment, finally, the damage we're doing to our environment is insane, and yet we continue to do it, despite the fact we have the means, financial and scientific, to cure it. But as long as our inner environment, our inner ecology is polluted in the way that it is, then we will fail to respect the outer environment. So it's reflections in those ways that will perhaps lead to a new kind of religion.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next? If not, I have a question, but please. Okay, yes.
Thank you very much, everyone. Simple question, really. Just as an observer, there's a lot of, we mentioned one-upmanship, and even within Buddhist tenets or whatever, there's one school that is seen to be, a higher school, even in the terminology Mahayana, Hinayana, and throughout, I have a very good friend in Islam who talked about how in Afghanistan, they converted from Buddhism to Islam. How practically, because it seems so rooted in the human personality, whether it's a survival, being the top dog, that we project one-upmanship. I just wondered if you had anyone had any offering on that.
So to what extent, while of course we talk of how Dalai Lama has gone beyond it, and many of you have reflected on that, to what extent actually in the world, when it comes to religious beliefs and everything, it's still dominated by the one-upmanship and of supremacism in different contexts, right? Who would like to take that, please? Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a natural human sort of desire, isn't it, to be better than everyone else, or to identify with oneself with the top thing. It's a kind of ridiculous idea, really. It's quite. The teachings actually, and you'll find this with all schools of Buddhism, that actually the core of it is that there is only a we. There is actually no other. We and the environment are actually one. So there can't be a top dog. We're just all interconnected. It's a we and no other. Of course, the way we think is dualistically, isn't it? So we're always judging and comparing and so on. But that's one of the diseases of the human mind, which the Dharma addresses directly and deals with in the practice. I'm sure other people have got lots of things to say about that.
Well, I just think it's basic human nature to try and acquire wealth and power. And in a way, through religious institutions or ashrams or whatever, there's a lot of unaccounted wealth and unquestioned power. So that's just basic human psychology. But I think today there's a lot of personal freedom, which has come through education, which has come through economic empowerment, and that has helped women also to stand on their own feet and find their own voice. Not everywhere, but the Women's Project is very patchy across the world, but certainly in some parts. And I think we no longer live in religious societies, so there is a great deal of personal freedom to explore and find what is congenial to one and conducive to one's inner well-being. And I think there's a growing spiritual search. That's what I have observed through setting up this group in London where we have workshops every summer. Through my charity, there's a growing spiritual hunger. And I think people have the freedom now to explore it, because even younger people are earning their own living, and they are no longer restricted by their cultures and societies. And the human population is pretty migratory now. And so they live in different cultures. There's a lot of freedom. So I think there's a much deeper spiritual search going on, which we should encourage, going beyond religion.
Anyone else who wants to respond?
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, on the one hand, there's the natural human desire to be following a religion that one believes to be, if not the only true religion, then certainly the best or the most appropriate. That's natural, and it's very difficult to think of ways that can be transcended in a global sense, according to the ordinary values of religion and a sense of fulfillment. But at the same time, given the violent repercussions of that self-aggrandizement that can often accompany the sense of being a member of the best religion or of the own religion, it behoves people within their religious traditions to look for the resources that enable them to overcome this competitiveness and one-upmanship. And so one can only do that in relation to one's own tradition, not sort of preach to others. And in Islam, one has particularly powerful antidotes to that poison of chauvinism. Explicit verses in the Quran that talk about the illogicality of ascribing to one's own group a kind of preeminence, that because one is this or that faith, or one, specifically it refers to Christians and Jews who the Muslims had encountered, who were claiming that they alone go to paradise. And the Muslims are told to respond by saying, not that you are wrong and we are right, we alone are going to paradise, but simply to say, whosoever believes in God and the Day of Judgment and acts virtuously, these are the people who will be saved. It's not a question of whether you belong to this or that religion. It's a question of whether you believe in the absolute, in something that is eternal, infinite, ultimately real, and then whether you have accountability to that principle. That's summed up in the phrase, the Day of Judgment. And that on the basis of these two beliefs, one strives to be virtuous. Those are given as the essential prerequisites, not sufficient conditions, but necessary conditions for salvation. And then there's one verse in the Quran in chapter 5, verse 48, which gives the kind of divine motivation for religious diversity and talks about the positive aspect of competing with each other, such as the Dalai Lama himself expressed in his address to the Gethsemane encounter. And that verse says that for each of you religious communities, we have given a path and a law. Actually, it's a law and then a path, a shir'ah and a minhaj. An outward law, an inner path. And if God willed, he could have made all of you one community, one ummah. But he made you as you are in order to test you by means of that which he has given you. So compete with each other in good things, khairat, wholesome competition. Compete with each other in this, in the putting into practice these ideals that you've been given in your faith. Unto God you will all be returned, and he will inform you about that regarding which you had differences of opinion. So the differences will be there, unavoidable, but they will all be resolved in the light of the hereafter, and for those saints in the different traditions in the here below, all these differences can be reconciled and transcended. So,
thank you. Father Lawrence, you want to add something, right, or say something?
Yes, just briefly. Thank you. I think that it's a very interesting question, and I think the reality of the dominant culture globally, although it varies across the world, is shopping. Shopping is the new liturgy. It's the number one leisure activity. And people miss planes because they go shopping. So the problem, I think, facing existing forms of religion today is that in that culture, religion has become branding. So different religions are like different brands. And somebody once asked His Holiness at a dialogue, can you be a Buddhist and a Christian? And it was clearly touched a very deep sort of question in many people, could feel the interest. And he took a few moments to reflect on his answer. Can you be a Buddhist and a Christian? And he said, yes, at the beginning. So I think that raises, opens or reveals the nature of religious experience. And as religious experience deepens into spiritual practice and awakening, it both we find ourselves, usually, find ourselves rooted and grounded in a particular tradition, but in a way that makes all the other traditions seem like brothers and sisters. And it's just automatic, there is no competition. But until the religious practice reaches that sort of mystical level or the spiritual depth, there will inevitably be competition between the brands, I suppose.
Next question, please. We have got two, so we'll take two together. Yes, please, and then Cameron.
As speakers have mentioned that His Holiness always recommend for religious harmony and dialogue. And recently, our British King and his Queen visited Vatican. Is there any relation that his knowledge might be inspired him, and how important significance is that? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Cameron there, so.
Thank you for wonderful presentations. My question has to do with when we talk about interreligious dialogue, it's often premised on the idea that the two sides that are talking are already people who are quite accepting of other people's lifestyles and ideologies. You might describe them as progressive. So progressive Christians want to talk to Buddhists, for example. But what I find fascinating about His Holiness's life, and maybe some of you can reflect on it who know better than I, he was able to make quite close friends with people in the United States who described themselves as conservative Christians, evangelical Christians, born-again Christians, like President George Bush, for example. People who don't usually seek out interreligious dialogue, in fact, actually often demonize people of other religions. So I was wondering if you could talk about how his legacy is something in which he was able to cross boundaries in which very few people have been able to successfully cross and create very strong, lasting relationships across those kinds of otherwise hardened boundaries, and what we can learn from his example. Thank you.
And the first question, just to repeat the idea, was that the British King, I still say Prince Charles, but King Charles, and why they met, they went to Vatican. To what extent you think that he might have been inspired by, or they might have been inspired by Prince Charles's earlier interaction with the Dalai Lama, and in terms of interfaith and intersectarian dialogue. So those are any other questions. That's a final opportunity for a question. If not, that's fine. Please, anyone wants to respond to any of it? Yeah.
Prince Charles is constitutionally tied to being the protector of the Anglican Church, but I think he had a lot of contact with His Holiness. And I think at least on 3 occasions he met with him, had discussions with him, and so on. And he's very liberal in himself, but he has a constitutional duty to perform, which is related to, the way that the United Kingdom works. But I think he'd be a good influence. On the second question, I would say that there is a problem of truth. Truth is a big problem because we've made truth into a thing. That's the problem. And once you get hold of that thing, it's yours and you identify with it. But at the heart of religion, there is no truth in that sense. The truth is something everything is relative. We're part of it. We're part of a stream, a river, if you like. But the human heart allows us to make decisions, or in fact forces us to make decisions and to make choices. But it's got nothing to do with truth, which I can grasp. My truth, not your truth, my truth. It's a very big difference. And I think the understanding, once you begin to understand the mind, the nature of the mind, then these things start to become apparent. And unless we can really understand that, and really understand it in ourselves, not just as a theory, but as a reality, then there will always be these problems. Because we cling because of our insecurity, we cling desperately to ideas of what the truth is. Whatever it might be, my race, my class, my culture, my intelligence, my skill, my athleticism, my beauty, whatever it is, that becomes your truth and you hang on to it. And these things have to be abandoned. And that's what all religion ultimately says. They have to be let go of. And until those things can be done, I think there will be problems amongst all religions until that can be understood.
Thank you. Dr. Shah Kazmi, you were almost like you want to respond to something?
Well,
I felt
actually,
that. Please
I was just looking at the preface that the Dalai Lama wrote for this book, Common Ground Between Islam and Buddhism, and it made me think that this is an answer to your question as to how he can speak across these boundaries and even to speak to people who are very deeply and exclusively rooted in their faith, committed to it, and what is it that makes them open up to the Dalai Lama? I think he gives us the answer to that question in this paragraph. He says, "My Muslim friends have explained to me that since God is characterized as compassionate and merciful, faithful Muslims are actually offering complete submission to the ideal of universal compassion." I just read a little bit more. "By this means, God's compassion can flow through the actions of the faithful. Such a practice is clearly a way of purifying the mind and seems to parallel what the Buddha himself said about the importance of actually living your life in a compassionate, ethical way. Thus, from a Buddhist point of view, the practice of Islam is evidently a spiritual path of salvation." So I think it's the Dalai Lama's embodiment of the two principles, of course, of wisdom and compassion. The fact that he not only embodies but radiates it as a bodhisattva. That radiation of the two principles, of the two energies, let's say, not just ideals, but the energetic, intentional projection. Emanation is probably a better word. The emanation of the pure energy of wisdom and of compassion emanating from his being that makes contact with those ideals in the religious beliefs and the religious orientations of people from across the religious spectrum. It's that contact that's made between wisdom and compassion within his soul to the wisdom and compassion that is at least intended by all true believers, because at the heart of every faith, whatever it be, is wisdom and compassion. And that's what enables one to overcome the boundaries of ideological and other distortions of wisdom and of distortions of compassion, that you're not able to open up to the other if you think that they are not following your own tradition. Those illogical and ruthless aspects of one's own carapace of protection, of one's defensiveness, that one is right. Those things are kind of dissolved when you come into contact with a person whose spiritual presence is so powerful, so irresistible, so irrefutable, that your defenses are just dropped. You think, I can open up completely to this human being who himself has opened up totally to the vulnerability of love. That's what I think.
Thank you. This is an opportunity for any final comments from any other speaker, please. Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Well, there's a lot of magpies flying around, and there's a saying, folk saying here in England, you know, when you see flocks of magpies, 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy, 5 for silver, 6 for gold, 7 for the secret that cannot be told. And, you know, these are the things we have to come across in life. You know, and this is the Dalai Lama's teaching, in a sense. You know, don't get carried away by sorrow, acknowledge it, live it, don't be carried away by joy. If it's a girl or a boy, or silver or gold. And then the secret is it can't just be something in the head. It can't be told because it has to be lived. And that's the core of religion. You know, and that's what the Dalai Lama truly understands and truly communicates. And it's a universal teaching because we all understand it. We all know that.
Thank you, Father Lawrence. Well, you can clap. I know you wanted to clap to that. So, any final comments or words for this panel?
Well, just in response to the two questions, I think the king had a long time to wait to prepare, and he had said earlier he would see himself as the defender of faiths rather than just of one faith. it only took 500 years for them to pray together, so we should never lose hope. As to why His Holiness became such an attractive and unthreatening figure to some of the American political Christians and so on, I think it's the way. Sacrifice is the word I would say. He experienced tremendous suffering throughout his life, his own rejection, but his exile, but also what was happening in Tibet. He carried that pain, that sacrifice, and turned it into sacrifice, actually, and did not lose the spirit of joy. And that was only possible, can only be possible because you could be a victim and see yourself as carrying a heavy sacrifice and just identify yourself as a victim. Understandably that would be the case. But he didn't do that. He rose to a wisdom beyond the victimization. And I think that was only possible because of a very profound and genuine humility, which enabled him to move equally among all people. And it was instantly recognized by the people he met.
Thank you. Seringla, any final comments? Anything?
I would just say that. Yeah, I would just want to say that it is His Holiness's, personality or nature that he sees everybody as equal. There is no friend or foe to him. To him, everyone is equal. There is no high or low. There's no, it's you and me. He sees everybody and everything as equal. He's very clear and clean in his mind, and that approach of him naturally attracts people. I think that mainly because of his humility.
Thank you. Lady Noon.
I think it's spirituality is a journey of consciousness. Religion is a means to it. It's not in itself. The Buddha said, "My dharma is a raft, and abandon it when you reach the other shore." And the evolutionary point that we are at, it's self-transcendence that is called for. And traditionally in Indian thought, in the presence of the self-realized rishi, there was no enmity. Even the lion and the deer, everybody was pacified, because the world it's a world of vibration, which quantum physics also tells us. So, the Dalai Lama vibrates at that level. It's not what he teaches. It is the quality of his being that is a lesson, and that is the presence in the world, and that each one of us have to do that for ourselves, transform our own energy. And that's what he stands for me.
Thank you so much for all the panelists. So again, remember when I said that when His Holiness visited us in 2012, I recall a couple of things from that visit in particular. So we were hosting him, he came in from another door, it was in cinema next door, and once he was done, he was late by around 20 minutes. And the reason he was late was because he was meeting Aung San Suu Kyi, who was there in London. Now, I thought of that, of course, because there was another leader who was Nobel Peace Prize winner, but we also know, of course, she has suffered a lot in her life. She continues to suffer from the Burmese government, right, Burmese military. At the same time, on Rohingya issue, we know the position she took was quite Buddhist supremacist. There are many evangelical Christians around the world, particularly in American South, but also in Uganda and other places, who are actively persecuting LGBTQ people. You've got Hindu nationalists in India who are persecuting Muslims and Christians. You've got Islamist supremacists who are doing something similar around the world. So we are living in a world which is filled with conflict, with supremacism, where one-upmanship is very much there. In that sense, the Dalai Lama's message becomes even more important. But another thing which I recall of that event of Dalai Lama coming is, so at that time we had a different vice chancellor. Dalai Lama did spend 30 seconds with the vice chancellor, that's it. But he called a particular security person who was standing there. called him downstairs, hugged him and called him brother. So when he was talking about the way he touched people, and I remember that the person who wasn't expecting, right, he was in security, the way in which Dalai Lama broke hierarchy very clearly without even knowing what he was breaking, interacting with people, is what makes him special, right? What makes him very different, what makes him not very polished in every sense, not very slick, I would say, in terms of how he would do it, but very genuine. So whoever has interacted with him, the only thing we hear is how genuine he is. So on that note, and you'll see we are before time, should we have? On that note, can you please join me in thanking the panel for?
I think we should thank you.
A good start, and we have now, well, we have 22 minutes for break. So please follow, the volunteers will tell you where the tea and coffee break is. Take break if you want to go out, but come back, and we'll start sharp at 11:45, please.